In this lesson, let's talk about contacting suppliers. You've made a great list of them. Now it's time to reach out with them and start communicating with them. In my supplier tracker, I have 10 examples of potential suppliers for my inverter cables. As you'll see, I don't have any of the columns filled out as far as lead time or costs or anything else. Step one of this is going to be finding the contact information for each of these suppliers. In order to do that, you expand each section, click on search for contact info, and then all it's going to do is a Google search for their contact info. It looks like the top result here matches up with my factory. And usually what you'll find is either on that page, or maybe you have to click on the Contact Us page or the About Us page, you can find the contact information for that specific factory. After finding the contact info for that factory, I'm just gonna go ahead and enter it into my supplier tracker so I don't have to look for it again. Click on Add Contact Info, enter their email address. I'll go ahead and put their name in there and go ahead and save it. If you have other contact info like their WeChat or their phone number, feel free to go ahead and enter that in there as well. Let's go ahead and search for the next one to do another example. This one's for American Power Conversion. Search for their contact info. Looks like it's now called APC, formerly known as American Power Conversion. And there's the Contact Us page. Same thing on this page. I'm going to go ahead and grab their contact info. Interested in purchasing APC products, call us here. So I'm going to go ahead and enter that phone number. Looks like in this example, they don't give out their email address, but instead it's a contact us form, but I'll go ahead and save that in the email address field anyway. From time to time, you won't be able to find the contact info for one of these respective factories. And if that's the case, the next best thing you can do is search for this factory on something like Alibaba or Global Sources. And then if you find them there, you can contact them through their online messaging platform in order to communicate with them. Now that you have found each supplier's email address, you'll need to figure out what you're going to say in the initial email. When you're contacting potential suppliers, you have already some information about them from your research. You also have all the knowledge about your product idea and what you're looking for. Now you need to know if the supplier can produce the product to your specifications and how much it will cost and a few other details. This initial email is your chance to get all that information so that you can decide which ones are the best and order samples from them. There are lots of different opinions on how to approach suppliers and what to say. The best plan is to be clear, concise, and direct with your message. We spoke earlier about a potential language barrier, so the more clear and concise you can be, the better off you'll be. So now, what should you include in your email? Start by briefly introducing yourself and keep it simple. Let them know who you are and why you're contacting them. Something as simple as, hey, I'm Greg, I run an e-commerce company in the US and I'm looking for a supplier for this product. I've included some more information about the product specifications, as well as a few questions for you below. I look forward to your reply. Next, let them know what product you're looking for and give an outline of your requirements. Some points will be different depending on the product, and the level of information the supplier needs may depend on if they've produced a similar product before or not. Quick tip for you, format your product requirements or points along with the questions in a list instead of paragraph format. Using bullet points for each of your product requirements helps the supplier clearly understand what you're asking for. Numbering each question helps bridge the language barrier gap and increases the chances that all your questions will be answered. It's an easy to follow format that especially is helpful when communicating through email. In general, these are the top points you'll likely want to include. Product name or description. What is it commonly called? No need for a lengthy title. Something just like wooden roasting sticks or inverter cables is fine. A picture if possible. You can include a picture of your competitor's item or a photo from a web search. If you are wanting to make modifications to what is shown in the picture you provided, outline these on the picture as well as in writing. I use a simple free tool like Snagit to draw or annotate on the picture. You can even include a drawing if you think that would be helpful, but that's not required. You can also include a link to a similar product either on Amazon or somewhere else on the web. The next thing you'll want to include are any modifications or specs for your particular product. Example of these are something like the color and it's common for them to work in Pantone color codes. You can just Google that and see what Pantone color codes are, not just dark green or light gray. Make sure to include any size or measurement requirements that you have. It's important to give exact sizes and measurements. If you have a desired weight, that's important to include. Something like volume for liquids, that would be important, as well as the material. What do you want it made out of? Is there any modifications to how they've made it before? How else can you describe the material to make sure that it's being made out of the product that you want it to be made out of? If there are any specific function or features that your product should have, you'll also want to include them here. As an example, I once sold a sleeping bag and I wanted to create a little pocket in the top of it that a cell phone could fit into. This is where I describe that to the factory. If there are any product extras that you want to include, make sure to write them down in this initial email. These could be things like replacement pieces or refills, accessories, or maybe just extra screws or bolts during the assembly process. You'll want to give the specifics about these. For example, if I was ordering an electric toothbrush, I'd want to ask them to include 2 extra brush heads as replacement parts for my toothbrush. Other things that you may want to include in the spec section will probably depend on your product, but these might be things like ingredients or the strength or the use time or the lifespan, battery life, anything else you can think of that would be helpful for your specific product or you want to make sure is built or included with your product, enter that here. The next thing in our email that we want to talk about is our packaging requirements. Now, packaging can come in lots of different shapes and sizes. If you don't clear this up with the factory up front, in their head, they're probably thinking of a different type of packaging than what you are. These can be different things like the clamshell plastic packaging or a box or just a generic clear bag or anything else in between. You'll want to include as much detail as you can here, and if there's going to be printing on your box or on your bag or on a label, you're going to want to include as many specifics as possible, like how many colors there would be or how big it's going to be. After you've outlined all the requirements and specifications for your particular product, feel free to include additional questions you'd like to ask them at the end. The main questions you'll want to ask are things like, can you send me a sample? How much is the sample, including shipping? Can you create a custom sample, including all my product specifics outlined above? How can I pay you for the sample? What's the MOQ or minimum order quantity? Where's your factory located? What's the lead time? Are there any patents or certification issues that you're aware of with this product? These are all different types of good questions for you to ask your factory in this initial email. This might seem like a relatively long or in-depth email, but keep in mind, you're just going to write this up one time and you're going to send this same email to all these different factories and ask for a quote from all of them. Keep in mind when you're asking for price quotes, the price is probably going to differ depending on how many units you're ordering, so you'll want to give them an idea of that if possible. When you're getting back different price quotes, you'll likely see the terms EXW or FOB. These are different Incoterms, but essentially what they mean is FOB means that the factory is in charge of getting the goods to the port and loaded on to the ship or the plane, whereas EXW means that they are not responsible for that last mile, but instead those goods need to be picked up from their factory or warehouse. FOB is generally a little bit more expensive because they're responsible for getting it from their factory to where it ships from. I know we've covered a lot of information throughout this lesson. However, something to keep in mind is don't be scared about contacting these factories. If you leave a few things out in the initial email, it's not a big deal. Go ahead and send it to them anyway. You'll remember it later, and you can always go back and forth with them for these different questions. I remember the first time that I was reaching out to factories, I was really nervous and scared because I never worked with factories before and felt like a little bit of imposter syndrome for reaching out to them. Don't let that be the case. Your email doesn't have to be perfect. What's important is you go ahead and send this to them so you can start getting back pricing information and you can start experiencing what it's like to work with these different factories. In the next lesson, I'm going to show you guys how you can enter all the information you receive back from each supplier into the supplier tracker so that you can keep track of these different price quotes. I'll see you there. By the end of this lesson, you guys will understand how to analyze different quotes and compare your different suppliers. Once you start receiving responses back from the different suppliers, you'll find it helpful to keep all the information in one place. Inside of Jungle Scout, our supplier tracker makes this very easy. I'll walk you through each section of the supplier tracker, show you how to compare quotes, and then how to determine who the suppliers are that you ultimately want to order samples from. Once you start receiving responses from your suppliers, you're going to want to track this inside of the supplier tracker. Underneath the Quotes tab, we've made it easy for you to add the price in the quote that your supplier provided to you. I'll click on Add a Quote and fill in the corresponding information. It's also good to go ahead and track the cost of the sample and the sample shipping. Oftentimes this is included in one price, and if so, just fill out one of the fields. If you've received multiple quotes from your supplier, either because of different order quantities or different materials or anything else, feel free to add multiple quotes underneath the same supplier inside of the supplier tracker. Before we created the supplier tracker, it was very difficult to keep track of all these different prices from all these different suppliers, and especially if you receive multiple quotes from the same supplier. By using the supplier tracker, it makes it much easier to sort and store all this information. And then ultimately, it's very easy to go in here and see which of these suppliers is going to be the best to work with. It's also okay if you need to ask your supplier further questions after receiving a quote or based on any of the information they sent you. The next video will touch more on negotiating tactics, but for now, go ahead and just record the price that they give you. If there are multiple quotes for one supplier inside of your supplier tracker, go ahead and click the little heart to favorite, and that way it will put this quote onto the main comparison screen. We'll touch more on the supplier tracker in future videos, but for now, it's also important to know and understand that you can also add notes in here. The notes come in handy when you're communicating with a lot of different factories at the same time, and it's best to write down more versus less information in here, and you'll thank me for that later. After you've inputted the values like the lead time, the unit cost, as well as made some notes about the quality of the suppliers, as we discussed in earlier videos, it makes it much easier to decide which one of these factories you ultimately want to go with. You don't have to choose the exact factory right now, but you need to have an idea of your top factories so that you can order a sample from these instead of trying to order a sample from everyone. In my particular example, I would probably go with the top or the bottom factory here because they have the lowest price. I've of course made notes in here that these are easy to work with, and the lead times are both acceptable. I'll see you in the next video where we'll talk a little bit more about how to order samples and negotiate the best price. I'll see you there. In the last